we are diving deep into the book of Job, and we're going to focus on a really pivotal, but let's be honest, often misunderstood character. His name is Elihu. And his arguments, well, on the surface, they sound incredibly wise, but as we're about to see, they're built on some really critical, fundamental flaws.
So just picture the scene for a second. Job, a man who's lost literally everything, has just finished systematically taking apart every single argument from his three friends. They are totally silenced. They've got nothing left to say. The debate seems to be over. And right here, in this moment, the book asks its most important question. When all human wisdom has been tried and fails, what's next?
And right into that tense, awkward silence steps a brand new challenger. It's a young man named Elihu, and turns out he's been listening to this whole thing, getting more and more frustrated with pretty much everybody involved. Now, this is a huge shift in perspective. Job's friends had a very simple, kind of black and white view, right? They believed suffering was just direct punishment for sin. You do bad, bad things happen. Simple. But Elihu comes in with a much more sophisticated argument. He says, no, you've all got it wrong. Suffering isn't necessarily punishment. It's God's loving educational discipline to turn you away from sin and make you even better. It sounds a lot better for sure, but the question is it correct? This quote, wow, it just perfectly captures Elihu's whole vibe. He's young, he's super passionate, and he is 100% convinced that he has some kind of divine insight that all these older guys completely missed. I mean, he's literally bursting at the seams to set the record straight because he sees himself as God's spokesperson in this whole debate. So, Elihu goes on to speak for 6 straight chapters. But what's he actually saying? Let's try and boil his entire argument down to its core logic. Okay, the crucial thing here is his chain of logic. He starts with a truth that nobody can really deny. God is just, okay? Then he builds a whole system around that idea. He says God uses suffering as a tool, for moral education. So what's the logical conclusion? Well, if you're suffering, it has to be for your own good, to correct some flaw in you. And therefore, in his system, a truly righteous person would just never suffer unjustly. It's all wrapped up in a neat, tidy little package. And on the surface, Elihu's case seems pretty compelling. It even sounds kind of compassionate. But there is a fatal flaw, a huge theological blind spot that completely unravels his entire argument. And this right here is the heart of the problem. Think about it. If Elihu's system is correct, if God never allows a truly righteous person to suffer unjustly, then the suffering of a perfectly sinless Jesus on the cross becomes completely impossible to explain. Elihu's neat and tidy system has no category, no room at all for the suffering of the perfectly righteous, which, by the way, is the exact problem Job is facing. Okay, so with that major flaw in mind, let's break down a few of Elihu's specific claims and see how they actually hold up against the reality we see elsewhere in the Bible. All right, first up, Elihu makes this really bold claim about God and politics. To prove God's justice, he basically argues that God would simply not allow a wicked person to rule over the people. Period. But the biblical record is so much more complex than that. I mean, it is filled with examples of God not only allowing, but actually using wicked rulers for his own bigger purposes. The classic example, of course, is King Saul. His wicked reign was the very thing, the training ground, that forged David into one of Israel's greatest kings. So yeah, Elihu's claim here is just demonstrably false. Next, Elihu argues for a God who's kind of distant, transcendent. He says God is so high above us, so far removed, that your goodness doesn't really benefit him and your sin doesn't really harm him. It's an argument for a God who's basically unaffected by what we do down here. But that couldn't be further from the picture of God we get in the rest of the Bible. Over and over, the scriptures describe God in these deeply personal, relational terms, like a husband or a father. He grieves when his people sin, and he absolutely delights when they do well. I mean, just think back to chapter 1. God is literally boasting about Job to Satan like a proud dad. He is anything but distant and unaffected. So based on all these faulty ideas, Elihu finally gets to his conclusion. He looks at Job and says, look, the reason God isn't answering your cries is obvious. God doesn't listen to the prayers of the wicked. Therefore, you must be hiding some secret sin that's causing all this. See? He's completely trapped by his own flawed logic. So how? How could this intelligent, passionate young man build such a detailed, elaborate argument that was just so wrong? Well, it all comes down to one single crucial piece of information that he just didn't have. This is the great dramatic irony of the whole book. We, the audience, we know from the very first chapter that God himself has already given his verdict on Job. He's righteous. Elihu is just confidently marching in, trying to solve a mystery while being completely unaware of the most important clue. He just assumes there has to be sin because his entire system demands it. What we've really been watching here is a masterclass in the limits of human wisdom. First, the friends tried their simple little formula, and they failed. Then, Elihu came in with a much more sophisticated theological system, and he failed too. At the end of the day, both of them fail because they try to fit the infinite, sovereign God into a tiny, predictable box of human understanding. And with that, every human argument has been made and completely exhausted. The friends are silent, Elihu is silent, Job is silent. The stage is finally set for the book's real climax. Yep, after 37 chapters of human beings debating back and forth, God finally speaks from the whirlwind. All the theories, all the accusations, all the flawed logic, it's all about to be measured against the divine perspective. And that is where the true answer to Job's suffering finally begins to unfold.